The cafe was quiet that late afternoon, the kind of stillness that made every word and movement feel magnified. He had come here often, seeking refuge from the relentless pace of life outside, but today something, or rather, someone drew his attention like a magnet. She sat alone at a corner table, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup, eyes distant yet alert. There was a grace in her presence, subtle but undeniable, that made the world around her fade into soft blur. When their eyes met across the room, it was like recognition of something unspoken. A spark, a jolt that startled him, shot through his chest. He had never believed in love at first sight, but there was no denying the sudden, electric pull he felt toward her. She smiled faintly, almost shyly, and he found himself walking toward her before reason could intervene. "May I join you?" he asked, his voice betraying just a hint of nervousness. "Of course," she replied, her tone gentle, yet carrying a subtle strength that made him pause in admiration. Their conversation began cautiously, small talk carefully chosen, yet each word seemed to carry weight, each laugh leaving an echo in the quiet room. He was drawn not just to her beauty, but to the intelligence behind her eyes, the vulnerability she didn't try to hide, the warmth she didn't know she exuded. As they talked, he felt his hands tremble. He tried to steady them, brushing against his jeans, fumbling slightly with his coffee cup. It was ridiculous. He thought he was a man who had faced countless challenges. Yet here he was, undone by the simple act of being near her. When he reached out to touch her hand, she didn't pull away. Encouraged by her response, he let his fingers brush her lips lightly, almost instinctively. His heart raced and the world seemed to hold its breath. Time slowed as he felt the softness, the warmth, the fragile humanity in that simple gesture. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise that melted into something deeper, a silent acknowledgement of the connection they both felt, but had not yet spoken aloud. She didn't recoil. And in that pause, he realized the enormity of the moment. Everything that had come before, the solitude, the past heartbreaks, the quiet resignation seemed to vanish in an instant. They were both standing on the edge of something new, something dangerous and exhilarating. Suddenly, the door chimed as a few patrons entered, breaking the intimate bubble around them. He pulled back slightly, embarrassed, but she reached out and touched his hand, grounding him. A smile played on her lips, teasing yet tender. "You've made me feel something I haven't in a long time," she said softly. Her words were a balm, but they were also a challenge. Could he dare to pursue this connection, knowing the complications it might bring? Family expectations, societal norms, the ghosts of past relationships, all of these threatened to keep them apart. Yet the tremor in his hands, the intensity in her gaze, and the warmth of her lips lingered, refusing to be ignored. He leaned closer, and for a moment the rest of the cafe disappeared. He realized that love, or whatever this was never a gentle thing. It demanded risk, courage, and vulnerability. The fear in his heart was matched only by the desire in his soul, and in that fleeting, trembling touch, both of them understood that their lives would never be the same. One simple act, a hand brushing a lip, had changed everything, opening the door to a world neither had dared to imagine. Yet both were now eager to explore. The days that followed were a blur of anticipation and quiet longing. He couldn't focus at work, couldn't sleep without replaying the brief, trembling touch that had changed everything. And yet, there was a hesitance in him, a fear that this connection, this fragile spark, might be as fleeting as it had appeared. She seemed to sense his inner turmoil. When they met again at the cafe, her smile carried a mixture of curiosity and reassurance. "You've been avoiding me," she said lightly, though her eyes betrayed a deeper concern. I haven't," he replied, fumbling with his words. "It's just complicated." Her laugh was soft, melodic, easing some of the tension in his chest. "Everything worth feeling is complicated," she said. Her words struck him with an unexpected clarity. Complications weren't a reason to step back. They were the very reason to move forward carefully, deliberately, with intention. They started spending more time together. Cautiously at first, savoring stolen moments over coffee or quiet walks in the park. Each encounter was a delicate dance of proximity and restraint. His hands still trembled when he reached for hers or brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. But each touch, each glance, built a connection neither could deny. Yet the world outside the cafe was unforgiving. Friends and family questioned their closeness, their intentions. Whispers of judgment followed them, subtle but persistent. He could feel the weight of expectation pressing against the fragile bubble of intimacy they had begun to build. She, too, had her reservations, the scars of past relationships making her wary of surrendering her heart. One rainy evening, he found himself walking her home. The streets glistened with reflections of amber streetlights on wet pavement, and the rhythm of falling rain seemed to echo the rapid beating of his heart. As they stopped in front of her door, neither wanted the night to end, yet both feared the vulnerability of crossing the invisible line. "I don't want this to be just fleeting," he admitted, his voice low but earnest. "I've felt it from the moment I saw you. I can't pretend it's nothing." Her eyes softened, and she took a tentative step closer. "I've felt it too," she whispered. "But it's scary. What if it doesn't last? What if we're just fooling ourselves?" He reached out, trembling again, and gently cupped her face. "Then we take the risk," he said simply, his thumb brushing against her lips, that same place where it all had begun. "Because if we don't, we'll never know what this could be." Her breath caught, and for a moment, the world around them vanished entirely. The rain, the streets, the expectations, they all faded into insignificance. What remained was the undeniable pull between them, a force neither could resist nor explain. Slowly, she leaned in, her lips meeting his in a kiss that was tentative at first, then growing in confidence and intensity as the fear melted away. In that kiss, everything shifted. The tremor in his hands became a conduit for emotion rather than fear. The hesitation, the doubt, the scars of the past all dissolved in the heat of the moment. They clung to each other, discovering in that instant that the connection they had feared to acknowledge was real, powerful, and transformative. When they finally pulled back, breathless and smiling, she rested her forehead against his. "This changes everything," she murmured. He nodded, a mixture of relief and exhilaration coursing through him. "Yes," he said, his voice firm yet tender. "And I wouldn't have it any other way." That night marked a turning point. The trembling, the hesitation, the fear, they were no longer obstacles, but reminders of how much they dared to feel. Love, in all its complexity, had arrived unannounced and unbidden, but they embraced it fully. And from that night onward, neither could imagine their lives continuing in the same quiet, solitary way they had known before. The days following that rain-soaked evening were filled with a heady mix of joy and unease. Their bond had solidified, yet the world outside refused to pause for their newfound happiness. Friends offered unsolicited advice, colleagues whispered speculation, and family expectations loomed like shadows over the delicate connection they were building. Each encounter, once a source of thrill and intimacy, now carried a subtle tension, a reminder that love rarely existed in a vacuum. He noticed her hesitation more acutely now, the way her eyes darted when someone approached, the slight stiffening of her posture when a familiar face appeared. She, in turn, sensed his protective instinct, the way he hovered, sometimes too closely, at the edge of her world. Though they had shared that electric kiss, that trembling touch that had ignited everything, the real challenge was only beginning, navigating the fragile line between desire and restraint, between vulnerability and fear. One afternoon, He invited her to a quiet park away from the city's prying eyes. Autumn leaves crunched beneath their feet as they walked, a tapestry of gold and crimson stretching before them. They spoke of trivialities at first, books, movies, the changing seasons, but beneath the surface, an undercurrent of tension lingered. He wanted to confess more, to bare his soul, but every time the words approached his lips, they faltered. Finally, they reached a secluded bench near a small pond. He gestured for her to sit, and she did, her gaze fixed on the water. The reflection of the falling leaves rippled, as though echoing the turbulence in his chest. "I need to tell you something," he began, his voice steady but low. "Something I've been avoiding because I was afraid. Afraid that it might scare you away." She turned to him, curiosity and concern mingling in her eyes. "What is it?" she asked softly. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he reached for hers. "I've never felt this way before. Not like this, not with anyone. And now, I can't imagine my life without you. But I also know that there are complications, things from my past that could hurt us both." She squeezed his hands, a small gesture of reassurance. "We all have pasts," she said gently. "It's what we do now that matters." Encouraged, he continued, revealing truths he had buried for years, mistakes, regrets, fears. Each confession seemed to lighten the weight on his chest while simultaneously tightening the knot of anxiety in his stomach. She listened without judgment, her presence steady, unwavering. A silent promise that she was willing to face whatever came next with him. When he finished, the silence was not empty but charged, electric with the vulnerability they had both embraced. Slowly, she leaned forward, resting her forehead against his, the warmth of her breath mingling with his. "Thank you for trusting me," she whispered, and then, almost instinctively, he touched her lips again, trembling, hesitant, yet filled with intent. This time, there was no fear, only acknowledgement of the connection that had grown stronger despite the obstacles. She responded with equal courage, and the kiss deepened, a wordless affirmation that they were willing to face the world together, whatever it might bring. But the world, as always, had its own plans. As they stood, a figure emerged from the path leading to the park, a man whose eyes lingered on them a moment too long, whose presence radiated judgment and authority. He was someone from her past, a reminder that their fragile happiness was not immune to intrusion. She stiffened, and he instinctively placed a protective hand on her waist. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Their love, intense and intoxicating, would soon be tested not by distance or doubt, but by external forces determined to challenge what they had built. They walked away together, hands entwined, hearts beating in tandem, both aware that the trembling that had marked their first connection was now a symbol of courage rather than hesitation. Whatever trials awaited them, they knew that their bond ignited by a simple touch. A shared vulnerability was powerful enough to endure, and as they disappeared down the winding path, the autumn leaves swirled around them, a quiet testament to the transformative force of love, beautiful, unpredictable, and capable of changing everything. The next few days were tense, a quiet storm brewing beneath the surface of their lives. The man from her past, an imposing presence who had once held sway over her decisions, made it clear through subtle gestures and veiled threats that he intended to interfere. It wasn't just about jealousy. There were stakes, expectations, and social pressures that he couldn't ignore. And for the first time, they both realized that love, no matter how intense, existed in a world that often demanded compromise. They met at the same café, trying to cling to the safe haven that had been theirs. She arrived first, nervously tracing the rim of her coffee cup as she scanned the entrance for him. When he walked in, his eyes immediately found hers, and in that gaze was a mixture of relief, concern, and determination. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling slightly. betraying the worry she had tried to hide. He nodded, sliding into the seat opposite her. I know. I've been thinking about it nonstop. Whatever happens, we face it together. Her hands reached for his, the familiar tremor in her fingers mirrored by the pulse of her heart. He's not going to let this go easily. He won't accept us. At least not without a fight. I don't care about fights, he said firmly, his gaze unwavering. I care about you. And if standing by you means facing him, then that's what I'll do. But we need a plan. We need to protect what we've built, no matter what it takes. The weight of reality pressed down on them, yet in that shared vulnerability there was also a quiet courage. They brainstormed strategies, discussing boundaries, allies, and possible confrontations. Every scenario carried risk, but every plan also carried hope, a hope that their love could survive the intrusion of someone who refused to let go of the past. Later, they walked through the city streets together, hands entwined as if the physical connection could anchor them against the storm threatening to erupt. Every shadow seemed to hold a potential threat, every passerby a potential observer, but they moved forward with purpose. They couldn't allow fear to dictate their choices. Their bond had grown too strong, had been forged in moments of trembling vulnerability and tender trust. As evening fell, they arrived at a quiet park, the same place where their connection had deepened days earlier. The autumn leaves whispered in the breeze, a reminder of the fleeting nature of both beauty and danger. I don't want to be afraid anymore, she said softly, resting her head on his shoulder. But I can't ignore what's coming. You won't be alone, he replied, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. Whatever happens, we face it together. You and me. Against the world if we have to. The words were more than reassurance, they were a promise. In that moment, the trembling that had marked their first kiss, their first connection, now symbolized courage. It wasn't fear that defined them. It was the willingness to act despite it. A sudden noise, a raised voice, the unmistakable sound of someone approaching, pulled them from their moment of peace. He instinctively stepped in front of her, protective, alert, eyes scanning the dimly lit path. And then he saw him, the man from her past, tall and imposing, his expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. You think you can take her away from me? The man demanded, his tone sharp, his presence menacing. I'm not taking anyone away, he said calmly, though his hands clenched slightly. She's here because she wants to be. She's made her choice. The tension was palpable, a fragile thread stretched to its limit. For a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze, their love tested, their courage challenged, their future hanging in the balance. And in that instant, he reached for her hand, fingers trembling as always, but this time with purpose and defiance. Whatever happens next, he said softly, we face it together. Nothing can change that. She met his gaze, a mixture of fear and trust reflecting back at him. And as the confrontation began, both understood that their lives had changed forever, not just by love, but by the courage to defend it against all odds. The tension in the park thickened, the chill of the autumn night doing nothing to cool the fire of confrontation. The man from her past stood rigid, his eyes flicking between them with a mixture of anger, disbelief, and possessiveness. He had underestimated her resolve, underestimated the strength of the bond that had grown in just a few short, fragile days. I've made my choice, she said firmly, stepping slightly forward, her hand tightly clasped in his. And I will not be forced back into a life I don't want. The other man's jaw tightened, his voice low but dangerous. You think this is a game? You think you can just decide and walk away? I'm not playing games, she replied, her voice steady, though her pulse raced. This is my life. My decision. He stood by her side, placing a protective hand on the small of her back. His own heart was pounding, hands trembling, not with fear, but with determination. Every instinct screamed at him to fight, to defend the woman who had become the center of his world. Yet he knew that physical force alone would not solve this. What was required was courage, honesty, and unwavering resolve. "You don't control her," he said, his voice calm but firm. "And you never did. She chooses her own path now." The man from her past hesitated, as if confronting the truth of her independence and the strength of their connection was a reality too difficult to accept. For a moment, the night was silent except for the whispering wind through the trees and the rustle of fallen leaves underfoot. She turned to him, her eyes shining with a mixture of relief and pride. "I'm glad you're here," she said softly, "but I need you to let me handle this, too." He nodded, understanding that protecting her didn't mean taking over, but standing together. He squeezed her hand, a silent promise that he would not let her face this alone, yet he would respect her strength and autonomy. The tension began to dissolve slowly, like mist under the morning sun. The other man's anger faltered, replaced by a grudging acknowledgement that he could not force her choices. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he turned and walked away, his figure disappearing into the darkness. The threat was gone for now, but the confrontation had left its mark, both on their hearts and on the understanding of the world they would have to navigate. Together, they remained in the park for a while longer, hands intertwined, breaths mingling in the cold night air. The adrenaline of confrontation ebbed, replaced by a profound sense of relief and intimacy. In that shared silence, they both realized how much they had risked, how fragile yet powerful the bond between them had become. He reached for her face, his hands trembling as they always did, yet this time with a different purpose, an affirmation rather than hesitation. He brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek and leaned in, their lips meeting in a kiss that was no longer tentative but bold and resolute. It was a kiss that spoke of trust, courage, and the willingness to fight for what truly mattered. Pulling back, he rested his forehead against hers. "We've faced the first storm," he murmured, "and we did it together. Nothing can take this away from us." She smiled, a mixture of exhaustion and joy, and whispered, "No, nothing." In that moment, they both understood that love was not just the fluttering thrill of a first touch or the tremor of an initial kiss. It was courage in the face of fear, resilience in the presence of challenge, and the unwavering decision to stand together no matter what the world demanded. As they walked home hand in hand, the park fading behind them, the night seemed less daunting. Every shadow, every challenge ahead, was no longer a threat to their love but a testament to its strength. They had crossed the threshold from fragile connection to a resilient, passionate bond, one that had been tested and had emerged stronger, ready to transform their lives completely. And in the quiet triumph of that night, they knew one simple truth. The trembling that had marked the beginning of their story had become a symbol of everything they were willing to risk for each other, and nothing, no past, no threat, no fear would ever take that away. The days after the confrontation brought a new rhythm to their lives. The tension that had shadowed their connection lifted slightly, replaced by a cautious optimism. Yet the challenges of the outside world remained, subtle but persistent, a reminder that love, no matter how fierce, was never immune to reality. They began spending more time together in ways that went beyond stolen moments. Mornings were shared over breakfast, conversations flowing naturally as they discovered the small quirks and habits that made each of them unique. He learned the way she tilted her head when she was deep in thought, the laughter that escaped her without warning, and the delicate expressions that revealed more than words ever could. She, in turn, noticed the tremor in his hands when he was nervous, the slight hesitation before he spoke his mind, and the unwavering kindness that guided his every gesture. Every touch, every glance, every shared silence became a thread weaving them closer together. The tremor in his hands, which had once symbolized fear and uncertainty, now carried a new meaning, a quiet tenderness, a reminder of vulnerability transformed into intimacy. Each touch of her lips, each hand held, became an affirmation of trust and courage. It promised that they were no longer navigating life alone. But love, they quickly learned, was never only about intimacy and warmth. It demanded compromise, patience, and a willingness to face the practicalities of life together. They navigated small disagreements, plans that didn't align, habits that clashed, but each argument was tempered by care and a desire to understand. There were moments when frustration flared, yet each time the bond they had fought for guided them back to each other. One evening, as the sky melted into shades of pink and orange, he invited her to his apartment. It was modest, filled with the quiet evidence of his life books stacked in corners, sketches pinned to the walls, and a sense of lived-in familiarity. She took it all in with a soft smile, noticing the small touches that revealed his personality: a carefully tended plant by the window, a notebook filled with scribbled thoughts, and a kettle perched on the stove, ready for tea. "I like it here," she said, her voice gentle. "It feels safe. I wanted it to be," he replied, his hands brushing lightly against hers. "Safe, but also ours. A place where we can be ourselves without the world pressing in." They settled on the couch, a quiet intimacy settling between them. He took her hand in his fingers trembling ever so slightly, and pressed it to his lips. "I never realized how much courage it takes to love," he admitted. "To open yourself fully, knowing there's risk. But with you, I feel like it's worth it." She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. "It is worth it," she whispered. "And I've never felt more alive than I do with you." The night stretched on in quiet conversation, laughter, and tender moments that deepened their emotional connection. They shared stories of childhood, dreams for the future, and fears they had long kept hidden. Each revelation, each honest confession, strengthened the foundation of trust between them, creating a sense of partnership that transcended mere attraction. As she left that evening, hand in hand with him, they paused at the doorway, reluctant to part. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "we continue building this. Whatever this is. Together." "Together," he echoed, brushing a trembling hand across her lips in a familiar, tender gesture. It had started as fear, uncertainty, and hesitation, but now it had evolved into something powerful, an emblem of trust, intimacy, and unwavering commitment. And as he watched her disappear into the night, he understood that love was no longer just a fleeting spark. It was a living, breathing force, shaping their days, guiding their decisions, and transforming their lives in ways neither had imagined. Every challenge ahead, every obstacle, would be met with the strength of the bond they had nurtured, proving that the trembling of a hand could lead to a lifetime of courage, passion, and unbreakable connection. Life settled into a fragile rhythm, but the calm was deceptive. Though they had built a foundation of trust and intimacy, the outside world still had ways of testing them. Friends' opinions, lingering shadows from her past, and the subtle pressures of society reminded them daily that love alone could not shield them from challenges. One evening, he arrived at her apartment unexpectedly. She had been waiting for him, but the look in her eyes told him immediately that something was wrong. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of a scarf, her breath shallow, as if bracing herself for impact. "Talk to me," he said gently, his own hands trembling slightly as they always did in moments of heightened emotion. She took a deep breath. "It's him," she admitted. "He's not giving up. He's making moves I didn't expect, trying to interfere with my life in ways I can't ignore." He nodded, feeling the familiar surge of protective instinct. Yet he knew this wasn't just about confrontation. It was about trust, resilience, and the choices they would make together. "We face it," he said quietly. "Whatever he tries, we face it together. But you have to let me in. You can't bear this alone." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I don't want to burden you," she whispered. "You're not a burden," he said firmly. "You're the reason I've learned to face my fears, the reason my hands tremble with purpose rather than hesitation. It's worth every risk." The vulnerability in his voice gave her courage. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly lean on him, to share the intricacies of the threats, the veiled threats at her job, the subtle manipulations meant to unsettle her. He listened intently, every detail sharpening his resolve. Days passed, and together they strategized. They reinforced boundaries, sought advice from trusted friends, and created contingencies that allowed her to feel secure without feeling stifled. Through it all, their bond strengthened, not just through shared passion, but through shared responsibility and unwavering support. The trembling in his hands no longer symbolized fear. It became a testament to his dedication, a physical reminder that love required both heart and action. One evening, as they walked along the riverbank, the city lights reflecting on the water like scattered stars, she stopped and turned to him. "I've been thinking," she said softly. "All of this, everything we faced, it's changed me, made me braver than I thought I could be. And I owe that to you." He reached for her hands, holding them gently. The familiar tremor present but subdued, transformed into tenderness. "And I owe it to you," he replied. "You've taught me to feel deeply again, to embrace vulnerability instead of hiding from it. We've both changed." Together, they stood there for a long moment, letting the cool breeze wash over them, the sounds of the city around them fading into insignificance. Then, without warning, he leaned in, brushing his trembling fingers against her lips, a ritual by now, intimate and comforting. Their kiss was soft at first, exploratory, and then deepened with emotion, passion, and the knowledge that they could withstand the storms ahead. Pulling back slightly, she rested her forehead against his. "I trust you," she murmured. "No matter what comes next, I trust us. And I trust you," he said, voice low but unwavering. "We faced fear, uncertainty, and challenges we didn't even imagine. Together, we can face anything." The night stretched before them, filled with unspoken promises, tender glances, and the quiet determination that love was not just about the moments of happiness, but also about enduring hardships side by side. Their hands remained entwined, the tremor in his fingers a silent testament to both his vulnerability and his unwavering commitment. As they walked home, step by step, shoulder to shoulder, they realized that their connection was no longer fragile. Every challenge, every threat, every hesitation had been transformed into strength, courage, and an unbreakable bond. The world could try to intrude, to unsettle them, but the love they had cultivated, born from trembling hands, whispered words, and shared vulnerability, was resilient enough to endure, to grow, and to change everything. Life, as they had begun to understand, rarely offered calm for long. Just when their relationship seemed to be settling into a steady rhythm, an unexpected event arrived to test everything they had built. It started with a phone call, her voice tight, a tremor of worry that he instantly recognized. "It's something about my family," she said, pacing the small apartment. "There's trouble, and I need to go home immediately." He nodded, though his heart sank. He had anticipated challenges, external pressures, but anything involving her family was uncharted territory. "I'll go with you," he offered, voice steady despite the knot of unease in his stomach. His hands, as always, trembled slightly as he reached for hers, reassuring her with a familiar connection. The drive to her family's home was tense, filled with quiet conversation and careful observation of the passing streets. She finally explained that her family had discovered parts of her personal life decisions she had made, people she had chosen, and they were not pleased. Their disapproval was wrapped in subtle threats, manipulations, and the expectation that she would abandon the path she had chosen. Arriving at the house, he felt a familiar knot of fear and protectiveness. Her family's expressions were cool, judgmental, each glance a silent challenge. He realized immediately that this confrontation would not be resolved with words alone. It required patience, courage, and unity. She stepped forward, facing her parents with the poise she had cultivated in recent months. "I am grateful for everything you've done for me," she began, voice steady but firm. "But my life is mine to live. The choices I make, including the people I love, are mine, and I will stand by them." Her father's eyes narrowed, and her mother's lips pressed into a thin line, but he stepped beside her, placing a trembling yet reassuring hand on hers. "She's right," he said, voice calm but commanding attention. "This isn't just about what you think is best, it's about supporting the person she has become. I care for her, deeply, and I will stand by her as she navigates her own life." For a moment, silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then her mother spoke, a softer edge creeping into her voice. "We only want what's best for you," she said finally. "But if this is truly what you want, then we will not stand in your way." Her father's gaze softened, a reluctant acceptance replacing the rigid disapproval. The tension in the room eased, though not completely. The world outside, they realized, would always have opinions, expectations, and judgments, but their bond had proven stronger than fear, stronger than hesitation, and capable of withstanding even familial pressure. Later, as they walked away from the house, the cool night air carried a sense of release and quiet triumph. Her hand found his, and he pressed it to his lips in their familiar ritual, trembling yet filled with intention. "We did it," he whispered. She smiled, leaning into him. "We did. And we can face anything that comes next." The night stretched before them, filled with possibility and the unspoken understanding that their relationship had evolved once again. The trembling that had marked the beginning of their connection was no longer a symbol of uncertainty or fear. It was the heartbeat of a love tempered by trials, strengthened by challenges, and made resilient through mutual trust and unwavering commitment. As they reached her apartment, they paused at the doorway, taking a moment to savor the victory, small though it might have seemed. Every external pressure, every obstacle they had faced together, had only deepened the intensity of their connection. And in that shared silence, they understood that the life they were building, messy, unpredictable, yet beautiful, was theirs to shape. Together, he touched her lips again, a gentle reminder of the journey that had begun in tremor and uncertainty. "No matter what comes," he said softly, "we face it as one." She nodded, eyes shining with trust and love. "As one," she repeated, and in that simple affirmation, they knew their bond was unbreakable. The future might hold challenges, but they would meet them hand in hand, hearts aligned, unafraid to tremble, to love, and to fight for what truly mattered. Just as they began to feel the fragile peace settling into their lives, an unexpected challenge emerged, one neither of them had anticipated. A letter arrived that morning, addressed to her in crisp, formal handwriting. She opened it with cautious fingers, eyes scanning the contents, and immediately felt a knot of dread twist in her stomach. "It's from him," she whispered, her voice tight with tension. "He's trying to manipulate things legally, threatening actions that could disrupt my life." He reached for her hand, his touch trembling as always, yet filled with the determination that had grown alongside their bond. "We'll face it together," he said firmly. "Whatever comes, I'm not letting this shake us." The days that followed were a whirlwind of calls, research, and strategy. They consulted legal advisors, gathered documents, and meticulously planned each step to protect her rights. Every action was a test of their teamwork, their patience, and their trust in one another. Even small frustrations, mistakes in paperwork, delays in communication became opportunities for them to strengthen their partnership, to see that love was not only passion but resilience. commitment and unwavering loyalty. Amid the chaos, they clung to each other. Every quiet moment, shared coffee in the morning, lingering glances, soft touches was a lifeline, a reminder of why they were fighting. The tremor in his hands, once a sign of fear, now symbolized courage, the willingness to act, to protect and to love despite uncertainty. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of meetings and calls, they returned to the small park that had become their sanctuary. The autumn leaves swirled around them as if celebrating their quiet triumphs, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to pause. "I don't know how we're going to get through this," she admitted, leaning against him. "It feels like everything is against us right now." He held her tightly, resting his chin atop her head. "It doesn't matter what comes. We've faced fear, judgment, and threats already. This is just another obstacle. And we'll face it together, step by step, hand in hand." Their eyes met, and in that gaze was a reaffirmation of everything they had endured and overcome. The bond they had cultivated was no longer fragile. It had been tempered by every challenge, every moment of vulnerability, and every act of courage. A sudden noise, a branch snapping in the wind, made her jump, and he instinctively wrapped his arm around her, hands trembling yet protective. The physical tremor, once a symbol of hesitation, now carried a different meaning. It was the pulse of vigilance, love, and unwavering support. "We'll get through this," he murmured, brushing a trembling finger across her lips, their ritual of reassurance and intimacy. "No threat, no past, no obstacle can take away what we have." She nodded, closing her eyes briefly to savor the moment. "I trust you," she whispered, voice steady, eyes shining. "And I trust us." The weeks that followed were grueling, each day presenting new challenges, subtle threats, and moments of doubt. Yet they persevered, leaning on one another, learning the intricate dance of patience, strategy, and mutual support. The bond forged through trembling hands, whispered confessions, and tender kisses had become a fortress strong, resilient, and unshakable. And in the quiet moments between battles, when paperwork was done, calls concluded, and the world outside paused, they found joy in the simplest of things. A shared laugh, a soft touch, a kiss that reminded them of how far they had come. By the time the legal matters were resolved in their favor, they had emerged stronger than ever. The challenges had not weakened them. They had solidified their commitment, proving that love was not just about fleeting passion, but about standing together when the world demanded courage, resilience, and unwavering trust. As they walked home hand in hand, leaves crunching beneath their feet, the tremor in his hands lingered not from fear, but from the quiet intensity of love, the knowledge that together they could face anything, and the certainty that their lives had been irrevocably changed. The days that followed the resolution of the legal battle were quiet, almost surreal in their calm. For the first time in months, they could breathe without the weight of threats, judgment, or uncertainty pressing down on them. The world outside remained unpredictable, but within the cocoon of their shared space, there was peace, a hard-won serenity born of courage, trust, and unwavering love. They returned to their routines, yet nothing felt ordinary. Every glance, every touch, every whispered word carried a depth that only trials and triumphs could forge. The tremor in his hands, once a marker of fear and hesitation, had transformed into a symbol of intimacy, tenderness, and the profound emotional intensity of loving someone completely. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and amber, he led her to the quiet park that had witnessed the beginning of their story, the trembling touch of a hand, the first kiss that had changed everything. The familiar autumn leaves rustled underfoot, and the air carried a crispness that mirrored the clarity of his intentions. He turned to her, eyes soft yet resolute. "We've faced so much together," he said, voice steady despite the emotion simmering beneath. fear, doubt, threats. Yet here we are. And through it all, my love for you has only grown stronger. She smiled, eyes glistening with unshed tears. Mine too, she whispered. I never imagined that a connection that started with trembling hands could grow into something so unshakable. He reached for her as he always did, fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against her lips, a ritual that had begun in uncertainty and fear but had evolved into a declaration of trust and devotion. Every moment, every touch, every challenge has led us here. And I want you to know, I'm not just in love with you. I am committed to you, to us, to whatever life throws at us next. Her hands found his, holding them firmly, as if anchoring herself in the promise that had been made. I want that too, she said, voice soft yet certain. I want us, all of it, together. Nothing else matters. The moment stretched, the world around them fading into insignificance. They leaned into each other, foreheads touching, breathing synchronized, hearts beating in a rhythm born of shared trials and victories. The trembling in his hands, once a symbol of fear, now pulsed with something stronger: intimacy, courage, and the unspoken promise that they would face everything together. Then, almost instinctively, they kissed. It was no longer hesitant, no longer tentative. It was bold, passionate, and unwavering, a culmination of all the whispered confessions, tender touches, and quiet battles they had endured. In that kiss was trust. In that kiss was resilience. In that kiss was love in its purest, most transformative form. When they finally pulled back, she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. We've changed, she murmured. We're not the same people who met in that quiet café. No, he agreed, his arms tightening around her. We've grown. We've fought, we've risked, and we've loved. And now, nothing can take that away from us. They walked home hand in hand, the city lights twinkling like silent witnesses to their journey. The trembling that had begun their story was no longer fear, was the pulse of life itself. The recognition that love, tested and proven, had the power to transform everything. As they entered their shared space, they paused, hands intertwined, hearts full. The journey had been long, fraught with uncertainty and obstacles, yet it had brought them to this moment, a place of safety, trust, and unbreakable connection. They knew that challenges would continue to arise, that life would always demand courage, but together they could meet anything. And in that quiet, shared understanding, they realized the truth they had been building toward all along. Love is not just a fleeting spark, it is the trembling of hands transformed into strength, the vulnerability of hearts met with trust, and the unwavering choice to stand together, forever changing everything.